Okay, this video is on utility flasks. Um, they're an essential part of Pathfinders, and without them, the ascendancy is probably dead. I mean, you only need so many life flasks to stay alive if you click them. So how do these work? Because there's two parts to it, right? You have the flasks, you have the prefixes, and then you have the skills and modifiers on the tree. And what we want, ideally, is to have uptime. Because if we have uptime, we can predict what we're doing, right? So for instance, this build is not much of a build. We have a belt, and our resists are pretty good. And none of it comes from the belt. 84 comes from each of these flasks. That's a lot. So that's neat, but it also means you need 100% uptime. Because if you don't, you die. Right? If you accidentally go from like capped res to negative res, you take like 5-6 times as much damage. For this build, you might take more like 10 times as much damage. So let's talk about how this works, what doesn't work, and hopefully save you a bunch of currency. Alright, so for uptime, there's a couple parts we care about. First of all, is the duration of the flasks. The duration comes from the base type. The duration of a particular flask is not locally modified in any way, shape, or form. Right? All the modifiers are added together. So that's the next part. Increased duration. All sources of increased and reduced duration are added together. Quality, local modifiers, ascendancy, all of the stuff added together. Right? The next thing is charges gained. This is a little tricky to test when it comes to local modifiers, but my guess is that, again, it's all added together. Then we have increased charges gained. So this is where we start talking about the stuff you can find on the tree, on the small nodes of the ascendancy, whereas charges gained is the ascendancy, the trader. There's a few other places. And then the last thing we have is reduced charges used. And all that multiplies together and you get uptime. And ideally, you want your uptime to be 100%, but you don't want to be more, right? Once you have more than 100% uptime, it's wasted. So these flasks are pretty much the same. They all have 33% reduced duration for the increased effect. And that's easily mitigatable because none of these things are local, right? We have 20% quality, so that's 20% increased duration, 33% reduced duration. So locally, this flask has 13% reduced duration. Now, if we compare that to what we have over here, miscellaneous, flask duration, 65%. So our 13% local reduced duration is mitigated by that 65% for a net duration of 50 some. That's what we see. Right? Our flasks start out at 8 for a brief second. They normally have a duration of 5. So that kind of works out. All right. So that is doing local computations here for you, right? That lasts 4.4 seconds. Makes it feel like it's a local modifier. That is not the case, right? It is all added together. This is not like damage on a weapon, where local and global modifiers make a huge difference. This is all local for the prefixes. Right, so if you look at the Flask, we have a prefix of alchemists. Prefixes are all added together. Suffixes are all global. So if we have this is the chaos one, bad example. This guy, increased evasion. If you have this on multiple flasks, only the biggest bonus will affect you, right? So stacking this doesn't make any sense, right? Only the biggest effect matters. That again is different than what you'd find somewhere else. And it's a little bit clearer when you look up here. We have this movement speed and we have this increased invasion up here. These come from flasks, right? They are a little buff icon. Even if you don't have a buff icon, it still works that way. So the last part of a flask is how do you enchant it, right? What do you put on here? I have reduced at the end of flask effect for all three of these. And the reason for that is that I have 100% uptime just for my base charges, right? So the charges I gain in hideout, right? These flasks have been going the whole time now, is enough to sustain these. And then when I have flasks that I can't do that with, so for instance, this guy over here, let's put it in there. This one is used on full charges. And that's its own animal. But this is good when you can almost sustain a flask, right? Because this way, whenever you hit full charges, you're going to have a brief gap and then it goes again. It's also nice for flasks that have clicking abilities, like remove bleed, remove poison, things like that. So it's useful for that, because you never go too low on your flasks. For these flasks, it doesn't matter, because they're pretty much always full. If I ever have to remove poison, I just hit 5. I will always have flask charges there to do so. Next thing, of the modifiers, reduced charges is the most interesting one, because the way it interacts is that once you get 100% reduced charges, it costs no charges, which means that the closer you get to that, you can't get very close, but the closer you get to that is very powerful. Right now, we are 35% reduced flask charges. And we get this 20% from the belt. And then we get 10% here and 5% here. Now this might seem really expensive, but these are very powerful modifiers and they're only found on your belt and these two nodes. So that is very good. It also means that if you find another source of this, you know, more of it becomes more powerful. So this evasion flask, this jade flask, I've got 90% reduced charges used. And what you see is that this thing has almost uptime, right? A little bit more quality, a little bit more duration, a little bit more flask charges used, any of those things, and we probably can get this to 100% uptime. But right now it's not. And you would actually see that from if you have a different enchantment on it, right, where it is used at the end of the other one, at the end of Flask effect, it will break. Now this 19% reduced charges used really is more like 23, 24% as far as a multiplier towards uptime. Whereas if I had 30% increased duration, right, because my duration already starts at 65%, right, that's not really 50%, right? I go from 1.65 to 1.9. That's, I don't know, less than 20%. Let me calculate that. 1.65. It's like 11%, something like that. Oh no, that's not right. Uh, 14%. Either way, not very exciting. So that is where the modifier of reduced charges used is huge. And when it comes to like all these flasks with different durations, the way you can use them together is by reducing duration and increasing the effect on the ones that are easy. And on the ones that's hard, you look for reduced charges used. You look for a belt. And the only modifier that matters is 20% reduced flask charges used. And you can get this fractured. I think there's some for sale if you can get people to bother to sell it for like 5C. They are not very exciting, but they allow you to get to the point where your flasks have 100% uptime. And that is good, right? Because you can plan on it being up and you don't have to worry about the fact that like, hey, I've got 100% uptime until I get to the boss and I keep dying. Well, that problem goes away if your uptime is good enough in Hideout. Alright, so that is the biggest part of utility flasks. This setup has gotten way better in recent memory. I used to use the Ruby setup and run Righteous Fire off of it, right? Because this character has 77 max res on everything. In reality, because I'm also having the reduced damage taken, not from hits, just flat reduced damage taken, I have more like 84, 85% net resist. Right, so it's a huge boost. It also works nice for things that have minus max resist, or things that say your max resist is whatever. Like, I should have one of those. The replica lore weave or lore weave. So replica lore weave, this one says your max resists are 72. So you lose 3 points of max resist. But because you reduce damage taken by like 30 some odd percent because of increased flask effect, this is still putting you in the low 80s with this flask setup. So this is very potent. It is something really only Flask Pathfinders can do. With the trader, getting the same number of charges gained means you can only have these 3 flasks. That is not worth it. You know, you kind of want a life flask and you kind of want something else. But just this means you can make room for a lot of uniques. You can make room for crit. Crit tends to step on your suffixes. So you have lots of options there. Yeah. Again, passive tree. We're picking up this wheel. We're picking up this wheel, this node, and the rest is gravy. Like, none of the other things really matter. This is all the nodes that reference Flasks at this point. There used to be more, like over here. You can still get 10% increased effect, which is awesome, but it's expensive to go there. Right? You don't get much else. This is some Flask charges gained. It's like 10%. It's not really worth it, especially because of what you have access to anyway. Yeah, works pretty well. Utility flasks work very different from life and mana flasks because of the way quality works, duration works, and some of the modifiers are calculated. So that's a different video. I don't know if I'm gonna recording it. It's a little bit trickier to set it up. Whereas in Hideout with utility flasks, it's pretty easy to rig up a test like this and show that you can just do full sustain even with reduced duration. And for these two guys, you can almost get there, right? This guy is a 4.4 with a 20% quality, reduced duration, increased effect. But one of the issues with it is that this guy will run out, right? So it is not sustainable the way it is. You can pretty much see it after a little while. You have to get pretty lucky to sustain it because there's a chance your flasks don't use charges. I tend to ignore that out of my calculation because if you have reuse at the end of this flask effect, well, that means it turns off if it runs out of charges. It will fill back up, but it will stay off. Whereas these guys, this guy over here, used when at full charges, will keep triggering. Right, so it's a little bit easier in that regard. Alright. Yeah. This is the good enchant. If you can sustain your flasks, this is the good one. If you can almost do it, and this will just turn off if you can't sustain it, and it's not worth it. That is all I have to say about utility flasks. Again, not very intuitive if you just learned about how weapon damage is calculated with quality and local modifiers and all that, because this looks the same but works different. But it's worth knowing if you play Pathfinder. That's it.